Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello. Thanks for joining us. Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and the X-Zone TV channel divisions of Relmar McConnell Media Company, with studios and corporate offices in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. This hour will consider neuroplasticity and as an evolutionary tool. One of the most fascinating new topics in neurology is that of neuroplasticity. We used to think we came with a set of genes that expressed in a set way, and end of deal. But with the introduction of neuroplasticity, all the perceived rules are changing. With us this hour to explore this new landscape and its implications is Dr. Justin James Kennedy. Dr. Kennedy is a TEDx speaker, a professor of behavioral neuroscience, an academic and executive coach, and an organizational neuroscience expert at Harvard University. Dr. Kennedy's expertise lies in the aforementioned field of neuroplasticity. His website, npnhub.com. Dr. Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
It's a pleasure to be here, Gwilda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So to start out with, for those of us that don't know what's the difference between genes and DNA, would you kind of clarify that for us?
Well, the genetic programming around your profile are different to the coding. So genes are the definition of how the brain shows up in your function. The genetics are looking at the variation of heredity in organisms. So it's an important branch of biology to organisms, if that helps.
Okay, so I got lost. How does the brain play in here?
So the brain is the machine that does the processing, and the genes will influence how those
Okay, I seem to have lost your sound. Would you check to be sure your mic isn't muted?
I don't know why it clicked out. It was very odd. But anyway, all is good.
Okay. So what is neuroplasticity?
I mean, in simple terms, well, the neuroplasticity is a word that describes the fact that your brain is plastic. It's not set in stone. It has the ability to change based on experience, based on learning, or based on trauma.
Oh, interesting. So trauma plays a part in there as well as learning and environment.
Mm-hmm. So,
Okay.
if you have an accident or traumatic brain injury, it's going to influence the plasticity or the functioning or the way in which certain parts of the brain are wired and the function of how these neurons interact with each other.
How old is neuroplasticity? How long has it been around?
I mean, as a scientist,
yeah.
As a science has been around, pretty much as long as neuroscience has been around, but it's come in phases of its relevance to mainstream neuroscience. I think a great way of answering that is based on the work of Michael Mersnich, who has done some great research over the 70s and 80s, showing that the adult brain is plastic, and that the learning that you have during your adulthood, even into your late adulthood, can influence the way that your brain processes information. So you can learn a language, for example, in your late adulthood, and that will influence the way that neurons speak together and the kind of neurotransmission that is processed in the brain.
So speaking of as we grow older and retire and get less and less stimulus, does that impact the neuroplasticity?
Most definitely. Like anything, as it gets older, it has less of that plasticity. I mean, it doesn't mean it has none, but as your body gets older, it becomes less flexible. It's more difficult to touch your toes when you are 80 when you are 8. There's obviously that difference. So the same with the brain.
If we remain mentally active, does that affect it at all?
It most definitely does.
We lost your mic again, sir.
It's very odd. I don't know why. Anyway, let's carry on. The more active you are cognitively, and the more challenging the activity, the more effective the neuroplasticity. So the more challenging the mental tasks, the more neuroplasticity will follow. I mean, think of it as learning, Gwilda. It's the more challenging the learning, the more work the neurons are going to have to do to reformat or redefine the pathway. So, if it's too easy, not much. If it's too difficult, not much either. You have to find that Goldilocks zone so that you get the right kind of challenge to facilitate the learning, and that new pathway is being embedded and sustained as well.
So you meant, we've talked about if there's not enough, okay, but what is too much, and what effect does that have?
It's a great question. What happens when there is too much? The brain kind of gets overwhelmed. It's just simply that the brain has too much information overload, and it can't process that amount of information. It also causes stress at a neurological level. There's just too much electricity pumping through the pipes, so that the brain doesn't have enough bandwidth, to use some technology references.
So again, technology references. Does that mean also as we age, do we lose some of our ability for that bandwidth? Do we lose some of our capability?
Unfortunately, we do. The body and the brain are one system. So, as we get old, these functions deteriorate. But there is great evidence of ways that you can sustain that, or at least slow the decline down, Gwilda.
And how is that?
I mean, it's everything our grandparents told us. Eat well, keep physically active, have healthy social relationships, keep yourself stimulated and challenged. Make sure that you are not having too much stress, but you're having enough stress so that you get energy. So there's a whole conversation about energy in there. So basically do the right things that you were told to as a child by your grandparents.
Also, on the other end of our lives, it seems like children, say for instance, children just entering into preschool, they've had a life at home that's been fairly sheltered, and all of a sudden they're in an environment where we have all sorts of kids running around doing all sorts of things, and they can get overwhelmed and get very emotional. Is it the same thing, the same too much stimulus?
The pre-adolescent brain basically is a safety monger. It just needs to feel safe so that it can explore. So the pre-adolescent brain needs a lot of TLC, tender loving care. So if that environment isn't very TLC and tender loving care friendly, it causes that stress at the neurological level, and it causes unlearning to get in the way. So you learn to not trust so much, and you learn to be more doubtful than you necessarily. And that can show up as anxiety or even depression as you proceed in life. So, as Freud tells us, if those who read psychoanalytical work, says, give me the first 7 to 10 years. I think he said 7, and then I'll give you the man. I'll give you that full ability, because those primary years are so invaluable. Although that's where the basics are being laid down. That's where it's so easier for you to learn a second language, because there's so much space still in the brain. You've got so much empty space. The roads are still empty. You've got so much opportunity to build new highways and new connections.
Between the ages of whatever and 7, is that also where we establish our ability to access and use neuroplasticity?
Neuroplasticity as a preteen is happening all the time. You're just like this learning machine. You're just absorbing, and that learning is just bedding down the functions. So neuroplasticity is when the brain is plastic. So learning and growth are obviously part of that plasticity. So the more youth, the more space, the more neuroplasticity.
Makes sense to me. I could use a little more of it myself. How about you?
Of course, of course.
So does when we introduced the concept of neuroplasticity, did that change our understanding of inherited traits?
Yes, I think it informed the the trait theory and genetic modeling, and it says we're not set in stone. We have some maneuverability. I mean, not as much as we would all like to have, but it gives you the ability to say, okay, I'm not stuck with this opinion. The hard drive is formatted, but I can still tweak, and I can still influence how the traits that I have show up. So for example, if your father was always angry and shouting, those kind of habits get handed down. But you can become conscious of those. You can become aware of them, and you can say, okay, I'm going to do something different. But it takes a lot of work. Neuroplasticity isn't a day at the circus. It's a lot of energy. It's like fitness. You need to spend time on it.
Well, it's time for us to go into a station break. But on the other side, I'd like to get into how do you control neuroplasticity? How do you get it to work for you?
Okay.
Dr. Kennedy and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Our genes are not just a fashion statement. Go figure. With us this hour discussing the many implications of neuroplasticity is Dr. J.J. Kennedy. His website, npnhub.com. Dr. Kennedy, we were about to get into what is involved in controlling neuroplasticity.
The brain and behavior is the best way to understand it. So the things you do will influence the brain, and the brain will influence the things you do. So in order to facilitate healthy and useful neuroplasticity, you need to start with behavior change. So, I mean, obviously you could get into the skull and hack away at it, and that would change your behavior. But I don't think your listeners are interested in neurosurgery like I had after I was in a coma. I don't think your audience is interested in how to get a coma to cause neuroplasticity. They're interested in how they can use their behavior and their emotions and their attitudes to do that. So if you have a conscious awareness of a certain behavior and you pay attention and change that behavior, you're then going to cause new pathways to generate in the brain. I mean, a good example is that of a bunch of wild buffalo who go every day down to the watering hole. And if one day you'll see that the path to the watering hole has become definitely ingrained, and you can see the footprints. And if one day a young buffalo takes a new path, you will see that the new path is very, very light in its footprint. But if all other buffaloes start thinking this is a great new pathway, they will then start following him on the new pathway, and the new pathway will take time to become deep and carved like the original pathway. It may never get as as deep, but it may, and then it will have the same power that the original activity had. I hope that was a useful analogy.
I think so. We're talking about burning new neurological pathways.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's
And
the idea.
so,
But the pathways are a bit more complicated than being that. There's obviously neurotransmitters and action potentials and, physiological and neurological activity. So that's a simple example.
so if we change our behavior, it's going to change our brain.
Pretty much. That's a very easy way of putting it.
So like if somebody were to take up martial arts, in fact, I did this after a head injury, taking up martial arts, because when you do martial arts, you do a movement with one side, then you switch and do the exact same, but equal but opposite. Is that an example of using something in your outside world to burn new pathways?
Yeah, most definitely. Did you have a head injury, Gwilda?
Yeah, years ago.
Oh,
So
sorry to
if
hear that.
it's no problem. If we use, say, a discipline that can help burn new pathways that are advantageous to us.
I mean, discipline is the key word. What discipline it is will obviously influence the function. So if the discipline is to learn a new skill, like language or martial arts or playing a musical instrument, that's going to have different impact on different functions and different pathways in the brain. So, it depends on what you're trying to achieve with being disciplined in building new behaviors.
So then does it generalize? In other words, you've built these new pathways. Do we then start using them for other things in our life?
Kind of, sort of, kind of a little bit. If you improve your language skills, are you going to be better at karate? Well, you may have, from the discipline of learnt the language, you may be more effective at being disciplined. I mean, it's not going to teach you to be more an effective karate practitioner, but there will be some overlap.
Okay. So how can an individual, what's the most, we say, okay, I'd really like to control my neuroplasticity. I'd like to become more. I'd like to have more capabilities. What's the first step a person would take?
The first thing you need to do is start by cleaning your toilet. Nobody likes cleaning the toilet because it's not a complicated problem, but nobody wants a dirty toilet. So once you have built the habit of cleaning the toilet, you'll start to notice a dopamine sense of reward that you've done something good. And when that becomes a habit, the dopamine pathway becomes more familiar because you did something really horrible and you feel a sense of neurological reward. So now you kind of more in the game of looking for challenging opportunities that will give you reward post-event.
Let's back up a little bit for those of us that don't know. What is dopamine?
Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is associated with goal-oriented behavior and reward. So you can get a dopamine fix from many different things, from taking heroin to cleaning the toilet, from exercising. I mean, it's anything that is reward-based that gives you a sense of well-being.
And as you just pointed out, it doesn't have to be something you enjoy doing, but does need to be something that you feel you've accomplished, something you get a positive feeling?
It doesn't have to be something you do or don't want to do. But again, the challenge of the activity, the goal-based behavior does amp up the reward. So it's then back to that Goldilocks comment that I was suggesting, Gwilda, is that if you get a person to have enough challenge and enough motivation, you then get them to take tasks at the right level of challenge.
Okay, so again, a person wanting to learn to enhance or control their neuroplasticity would start out by challenging themselves with things that they can then accomplish and raise their dopamine.
exactly.
I have that right? Okay.
Exactly. So a teenager is very unlikely going to be motivated by cleaning the toilet. They will just get so irritated and they will go crazy. But maybe you can start with them to making their own bed. That's maybe, more teenage friendly kind of behavior change.
So then if they start enjoying the results of making their bed, then you can stretch it to the bathroom.
Exactly. You can make the challenge more and more. And this is something you can do by yourself. Losing weight's a good one. Exercise is a good one. Learning a new language. Just anything that you're kind of motivated to do. So, reward feeds reward. If you feel like you're getting somewhere, then motivation sustains itself. But if it's not motivating, you lose the oomph.
So what research or evidence supports the effectiveness of neuroplasticity-based interventions?
This is such an interesting question. So the first question is, any learning results in neuroplasticity? So the research showing that learning is a good thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be researched. The research that is interesting is looking at how the learning influences neuroplasticity. So then you have to think about what is the learning that you want to do, and how does understanding neuroplasticity as a concept facilitate that learning. So your listeners are obviously interested in the science behind this, and they want to understand, okay, so how does neuroplasticity help me understand what has been researched and how I can apply it? So the research is extensive, Gwilda, and you need to be specific in deciding what do you want to understand from the research. And the academics that do the research is, pretty much every neuroscience faculty does this work in some form or fashion. So the work that we do is more around pracademic research. What is the practitioner able to do? What are the practical applications? What are the things that you can do at home that will give you that neuroplastic result?
So you speak of practitioners. That's where a neuroplastician comes in, yes?
Exactly.
Is that a new term? Did you coin that?
No, the term was coined by a neuroscientist by the name of Norman Deutsch. And the neuroplastician is that practitioner who facilitates neuroplasticity. So an educator, a coach, a neurofeedback specialist, a therapist, a good friend, a parent, all these people are going to help you do things differently so that you build new pathways. It's like having an Anthony Robbins in your pocket who can help you do things differently.
So a neuroplastician isn't necessarily a scientist, but rather
they're
a
very
function.
much not scientists. They might have a science background, and many of us do have an academic background as scientists. But the pracademic focus is not the academic focus. The science of the neuroplastician is in the art and science of facilitating behavior change. And there's an art and a science to that, as I'm sure you're well aware. And the goal of the neuroplastician is to facilitate that change based on the needs and based on the motivation of the client.
How, as a profession goes, is there a profession as a neuroplastician?
The idea has recently born as a certification. So at the Institute of Organizational Neuroscience, we have invited a board of experts to facilitate what are the competencies and what are the outcomes and what are the requirements for someone to be certified as a neuroplastician. So we have partnered with several universities and institutes and training organizations so that we are seen as the midwives of the discipline for the neuroplastician. And it seems to be a good model in the fact that people are interested to show us their training in neuroscience. They're interested in showing us their expertise. So it functions in a very similar way as a board of lawyers or doctors or coaches, and giving them the space to show their wherefore and their training and their competencies and expertise.
Well, it's about that time for another commercial break. Dr. Kennedy and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Apparently, a neuroplastician is not where one goes for a facelift. With us this hour discussing the many possibilities of the neuroplasticity is Professor of Behavioural Neuroscience, Dr. J.J. Kennedy. Dr. Kennedy, let's break it down a little bit as to how working with neuroplasticity can help different arenas in our world. So, how does it impact learning? The ability to work with it. How does that impact learning and development?
So, learning and development in the business environment, in the education, which context should we speak to?
Let's start with education.
Okay, so in the education environment, we can see that if neuroplasticity is understood, we can see what activities will educate the brain in the most fluid and most sustainable fashion. So many teachers have noticed that if you ask children yes, no questions, you don't get the learning to be as sticky. Whereas if you ask questions that not only give other kinds of conversations, but get them to think and get them to be challenged, it becomes much more valuable. And this is an interesting conversation around how artificial intelligence is used to educate. So, anyway, we're going to get lost into that. But the point is that if you understand how the brain learns, you can then tweak the education experience to match the traits and the styles of the learning brain so that they absorb as much as possible.
Now, I understand there are different styles of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you take into consideration those different styles? And first off, would you mind listing what they are?
Well, I don't go into the belief that there are different styles. Every brain has its own style. I don't think there are specific visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learning styles. I think we all have those facilities. The brain is mainly a visual learning machine. The eyes are considered part of the brain, as opposed to other sensory organs aren't. But some people might learn with listening or with touch, but in terms of trying to put brains into different boxes, it doesn't really work out so well.
So you don't necessarily adhere to the different learning styles and trying to accommodate them.
No, I don't think I don't think that is a useful way for education. I think it's much more useful for you to be understanding what is the kind of information that is being processed, and a lot of it is actually emotional, Gwilda. The brain has a learning style of being emotional. So if you get through the emotional noise, you get the learning to be much more effective.
And so that goes back to you were saying how if you perform a task, whether you like it or not, but you feel like you've accomplished something, the emotion would be one of joy, accomplishment,
Exactly.
self-esteem, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Those are important things to mention, right?
So how can understanding neuroplasticity contribute to our mental health?
It's vital. In my personal experience, I was recovering from being in a coma, and the mental health functions that I had were all over the place. I couldn't speak, I couldn't walk. It was a pretty traumatic experience, and the mental health obviously wasn't great because you can't function so well, and that led into forms of depression that followed. So by setting tasks that were low-hanging fruit, it made me easier to become more motivated. And there were simple tasks that then became bigger and more complicated.
So when you add, am I hearing you say that the level, if you slowly step up, is very important
Yeah, it's very important. It's important then the gate of the steps are not too big but not too small. And it's very difficult to know what that is until you go out and experiment. I know that if I exercise and I get too exhausted too quickly, then and I don't have enough energy literally to continue. So to gauge the amount of energy I spend against the goal of having enough time is a simple way of maybe understanding that.
So if a person is depressed, they're having a lot of emotional problems, how does neuroplasticity start getting them out of that?
Neuroplasticity is when the brain starts feeling less stressed, feeling less out of control. When that depression of I don't know what to do, or that anxiety, I can't cope, when those functions dilute, you then have more bandwidth to get results, and you have more energy. The epinephrine levels lift up, your battery becomes more charged, you have more of a focus, and the acetylcholine levels start getting up, so that you then have enough energy to get to the dopamine.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, we were just chatting.
Okay. So as a neuroplastician, how would a neuroplastician approach a person that was just really distraught, depressed, and didn't feel like they had any resources? Where would you start?
The neuroplastician, as any effective practitioner, starts with intelligent questions. And the neuroplastician's questions initiate with neuroception and understanding what is the initial triggers of that client's perception, and how does that show up physically, emotionally, linguistically, and behaviorally.
So if someone's dealing with someone that has some pretty serious emotional problems,
Yes.
would it be preferable or absolutely necessary for the neuroplastician to also be have a degree in psychology, be it a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist?
Definitely not. A person has to have a skill as a behaviorist, as a behavioral practitioner. So being a teacher or a coach works very well. A lot of psychologists get left in pathology. So if you have someone interested in positive psychology, they're going to be much more effective in the arena of neuroplasticity. Yes, neuroplasticity is caused by trauma or traumatic brain injury, and Alzheimer's, and then many things can cause that plasticity or that breakdown. But if the person, as the practitioner, is focused on behavior change that facilitates growth of those neurons, they're going to have a much better outcome, a much more efficient or enjoyable result for their client.
So how can neuroplasticity be used to enhance cognitive abilities?
So cognitive abilities are at the basis of so much of neuroplasticity. If we look at the prefrontal cortex, it is really the newest part of the brain. I mean, evolution only just thought up this whole prefrontal cortex idea relatively recently. So the cognitive function is always going to be the last function. So it's always going to be the last person at the brain circus. So you need to understand the function of the brain a little bit. I mean, I'm not really well versed in the neuroanatomy, but at a basic function, the cerebellum is where all habits are housed. It's the old part of the brain at the back, where once we've learned stuff, that goes into the cerebellum. And once it's there, it's there. We have it, you can hear an old song, or you can pick up a guitar, or you can see an old face. That stuff is somewhere at the back of your brain. And if that has an emotional trigger, it pumps up the likelihood of that being remembered. So as a result, you get caught in this habit and emotional cycle of information. And you need to get that stuff out the way, or at least done or processed, so that you can take a deep breath, have the bandwidth to focus and pay attention to those details, to that working memory requirement of cognitive load and challenge at cognitive task. So the cognitive task is kind of the last opportunity. Think about it. We all went to some kind of exam in our school or our university days, and if you haven't studied enough, you're going to be really anxious, and you're not going to be able to focus, and you're going to do less effectively than if you were not so stressed about that. So, I mean, even the people who are supervising an exam can cause you to have unnecessary stress, which will cause you not be able to focus. So it comes back to the ability to focus, in one word.
I'm kind of unsure of what all you were saying there. Are you trying to say that you have to get rid of the stuff in the back brain or resolve it so that you can have more cognitive functioning?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. And that increases neuroplasticity?
You're asking about cognitive function,
Right.
and that increases the ability for cognitive processing of the working memory.
I understand now. All right. Well, it's time for another station break. Please stay with us as Dr. Kennedy and I continue to explore the hidden potential of gene expression. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What is the new face of genetic expression? No pun intended. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. J.J. Kennedy. Dr. Kennedy, let's move into a little bit about how can neuroplasticity be an aid to personal growth and spiritual evolution. And I don't, of course, obviously mean religion, just the evolution of the person, of our capacity.
I'd like to answer the question about religiosity, but I will say that for once I've answered this question, Gwilda. So in terms of personal development, if you know the machinery that drives your ability, your choices, your motivation, you're going to be more knowledgeable about what you're working with, and what things are possible, and what things are more likely to happen, and what things are going to trip you up on the way. So personal development offers great opportunity to investigate the self and understand the difference between the mind and the brain, feelings and emotions.
So what is the difference between the mind and the brain, feelings and emotions?
So the brain is an organ in the body, and when the brain does stuff, it causes activity. One of those activities are consciousness, and when we become self-conscious, we have mental awareness, and when we notice our mental awareness, we have mindful attention, and the mind then pops into existence as a result of the neural activity in the brain. And the whole conversation about consciousness is really interesting, but really dangerous to get into. So maybe I'll stay away from that unless you want me to go there.
So, how about practices like meditation? Do those help one achieve more neuroplasticity?
So the simple answer is yes, it does really help. And it comes back to the word discipline that we spoke about earlier, you may recall, and about disciplining the mind so that it influences the brain. Okay, so you maybe heard the phrase monkey mind. It's often used in Buddhist practices. And if you notice your mind is going all over the place, and you address that by finding practices that force discipline of attention, then the brain stops those pathways that are anxiety based or fear driven, and it helps you then build new pathways that are more useful.
As we've been speaking here, it seems like we've kind of, our default setting is lack of consciousness, lack of self-awareness, and more of a knee-jerk reaction. Is learning to work with neuroplasticity a way of getting out of that and into conscious living?
It's very well said. It is very much about building conscious attention so that you know what this machine does. You know what the brain does on its default. In my TED talk, I titled the TED talk, "Your Brain is a Lazy Democrat." And it says, to get out and vote is, it's not really what we want to do. It's a real mission to go and do that. And we all want a democratic society with good governance. But, the energy is not spent because the brain is lazy. It wants to conserve energy. Of course, why would you want to waste energy unnecessarily? And the brain is very heavy on cognitive function, and making decisions is something that costs the brain a lot of energy. So it tries to avoid them. So when it comes to demanding tasks, you kind of find reasons not to do it. You find easier ways, like to play on social media rather than to go and attend to things that are going to give you a healthy dopamine reward. So the way that you get your dopamine will influence the kind of behaviors you do. So if you play games all day on your laptop, it's going to feed that process. So this is where I feel better, rather than doing more challenging tasks that get you to feel better by doing tasks that build neuroplasticity in the right way.
I know that I'm not asking for a scientific percentage here, but if a person actively engages the exercises that develop neuroplasticity, how much is, versus not at all, how much is our potential increased?
I mean, it's what defines potential, Gwilda. I mean, if you are not engaging in activities that build neuroplasticity, you're never going to reach potential. Potential is the gap between here and now. I mean, here and now and then, sorry. So the potential is what you can achieve. And if you don't engage neuroplasticity, you're never going to move from here to there. So the word of potential, I like it a lot. I'm going to refer into action potential quickly in the brain. And in the synapse between two neurons, there is that action potential, that potential for action of neurotransmission to hop from one neuron to the next. And if that action potential isn't fired, there is no energy for new behavior. So at a very minute neuron level, the potential needs to be fired, and that will then translate into your potential.
Given that such a large portion of our society is totally engaged in sitting in front of the television set when they get off of work, or, playing with their phones, or working and playing on the internet, there's information going on there, but is it really useful for neuroplasticity, or is this a detriment?
The brain is easy to get exhausted, and it wants to have low-hanging fruit. And when there's too much fruit, there is lack of energy to find other sources of nutrition. So, there's so many apps out there that are addictive, and they're designed to be addictive because, there's advertisers and developers that, want to build a business, and, fair enough. There's no reason to stop a person wanting to be a professional businessman. In the background, however, that can cause detriment to the neuroplasticity, because if you spend all of your time on an app that isn't facilitating your personal development, guess what? You're not going to have much neuroplasticity. Michael Merzenich, the professor who really coined the term of neuroplasticity in the adult brain, has an app called Brain HQ, and it has working memory tasks that facilitate neuroplasticity. So, look at Brain HQ. It's a free app, and we've interviewed him in the NPN Hub, and we spoke about the role of the neuroplastician, and we got into a very interesting story. Can I tell you the story quickly?
Sure, but we are getting close to the end of the session, so please.
How much time do we have left?
We have about 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'll give you the 30-second version. So in discussion with Michael Merzenich, he was telling us about the work he's doing with juveniles and detention. And we were saying, giving them the app to play with is great, but there needs to be someone to facilitate and motivate that behavior, because the app works, we know that, but without a neuroplastician to facilitate and remind and motivate them, the brain doesn't really get it. The brain is a social organ, Gwilda, and when there is social connection, potential is more effectively achieved. 30 seconds.
Very good. So, Dr. Kennedy, what is your mission?
My mission is to make sure that neuroplasticity is not seen as a complicated word. It's something that the brain wants to do. Make sure that the neuroplastician is understood as something more than a beautician or a nail specialist. It's someone who is there to facilitate that learning process and to help you find the right challenges in that Goldilocks zone, so that you're motivated and you're easy to find those new habits. And it's an interesting story about my personal experience using neurofeedback, and we can have that for another time if you like.
Probably have to be for another time. What's your vision for the future if the neuroplastician is recognized and utilized, and we start engaging this in our everyday life and in our education and all of our systems?
The neuroplastician is a discipline that is multidisciplinary at heart. We're not looking to take over, psychotherapy or coaching or neurofeedback. We're saying here is a set of tools that are based on your expertise, and we want to help practitioners see their work through the lens of neuroplasticity, so they basically know what to do best with their clients to trigger that action potential so that they achieve their full potential.
So it sounds like anybody from any walk of life could benefit from learning to be a neuroplastician, including those that just want to help themselves.
Exactly. The process to become a certified neuroplastician is a little bit more complicated, but it's basically weighed on your quality of certification and your expertise as a practitioner, and that then qualifies you at various levels of being a certified neuroplastician.
We are just virtually out of time. I can't thank you enough for being on the show, and I hope that you have very good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you for your time. You're an expert interviewer. I really enjoyed meeting you, Gwilda. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed working with you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Kennedy was wonderful to have on the show. He is a professor of behavioral neuroscience. To find out more about the emerging discipline of neuroplastician, you can visit npnhub.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit our website, www.missionevolution.org. But please, be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our evolving world.